On today's episode of Locked On Wild, John Hynes tweaks his way to another win, this time against Utah. Let's break it down.
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Is happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day. And we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day as well. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we will break down three big keys to the Minnesota Wild's win over the Utah Hockey Club, including some depth scoring, a subtle line tweak that proved big dividends, and we will talk about, once again, a leaky penalty kill. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild since 2021 and credentialed media member. And apologies for those hoping for a postcast last night. With that 5 a.m. alarm, those games that start but after 7 p.m., especially when they start at 8:30, that's going to be something that we're going to have to address. And so we'll have one for you coming up tomorrow night for the Edmonton game, since that is a normal start time. And we'll adjust as we go. Still trying to get a routine down, and we're getting close. But another win for the Minnesota Wild last night, and there are two ways to really slice this one. We can point to the fact that the Wild blew multiple leads due to the penalty kill again, just springing a leak and absolutely losing contain on a Utah Hockey Club who was 3 for 31 at home. And by bringing that up first, I'm not trying to dismiss it, because it is, as we talked about in the open, it is obviously a concern. But I think the thing that bears repeating for this Minnesota Wild team is just how they have taken what is a common occurrence in these games for things to not go according to plan, for particular things that you rely upon normally to just have off nights. What are you going to do to respond in those circumstances? And last night, it was a little bit of an off night for Filip Gustavsson. Although statistically, Utah was pretty close to what their expected goals were. But we saw Gustavsson with, that goal in particular, where he wasn't able to corral the rebound, is a play that we've seen him make a ton this season. And a couple of those blistering slap shots that he just wasn't able to get to. And so your goalie, who the Wild have relied upon heavily all season, has a bit of an off night. What are you going to do to turn a regulation loss into an overtime win? Well, you got to put a few more goals on the board. And the Wild did that by getting one guy who has not scored since last season to kind of open the floodgates. 1-0 game through the first period last night. Utah thought they had the second goal of the game, but it turns out it was offsides. And at that point, Marat Huznadinov, off of a hideous pass by Utah, is able to score on a breakaway. And this was something that Michael Russo tweeted about. I saw a couple of other tweets in just observing the game while I was fighting to stay awake. Was it seeming like the Wild just needed a goal to open the floodgates. You couldn't really play much better from a shots perspective in the first period, although I think, as was pointed out pretty adeptly, it was a lot of shots on goal, but was it a true amount of scoring chances. Of the 22 shots on goal in the first period, I think there were 5 high danger chances. So quantity over quality for the Minnesota Wild early on, and they ended up trailing 1-0 after 1. Then you get the Murat Huznadinov goal, and less than a minute later, Kirill Kaprizov scores, and all of a sudden you're up 2-1. The Utah Hockey Club made the comeback in the third. They tied it up at 2-2. The Wild took the lead at 3-2 thanks to a goal from Marcus Johansson. More on him in a bit. Clayton Keller scored again to make it 3-3, and then Juuso Valimaki gives Utah the lead. The Wild go to the brink. They go to the final minute, and Marco Rossi ends up scoring an extra attacker goal to tie things up with under a minute to play. This is a situation time and time again that we saw last year that the Wild just were not suited for. They were not able to mount comebacks because there weren't other players consistently stepping up and putting the puck in the net. And look, I'll just be point blank about it. You're not going to get style points from this Minnesota Wild team right now. You're missing 2 of arguably your 5 most important players, one on offense, one on defense, and you're missing another playmaker in Matt Zuccarello, who I think does way more to space things on the ice than we initially realized. So you're, at this point, until those guys get back into the lineup, you are just trying to continue to do what you've done all season, which is to win games in which you maybe don't have your best stuff. But the key phrase is find a way. And John Hynes talked about that in the postgame last night. He said it was a good job of us continuing to find a way. We had the right mindset, the right mentality as Utah made their comeback. I know we would prefer that these games be a little more decided, but until some of those key players get back in the lineup, you're just not going to have that. And the NHL season is long enough that at some point during the race, you are just worried about getting to the finish line in one piece, as opposed to winning every game by a score of 8-1. Yeah, it's fun, and there are teams that you should be doing that against. But at the end of the day, the 2 points are the 2 points. And turning a regulation loss into a 2-point night in the final 60 seconds is a test to the resolve and the character that this Minnesota Wild team continues to show as this season unfolds. And we are going to talk later in the week about the contender conundrum, because I know that's been a hot topic so far this week after that loss against the Los Angeles Kings. Is this a legitimate contending team, or is it just a team that is beating up on the teams that are below them in the standings? And so I'm not going to get into it a ton here today, but it's a Wild team that is doing the opposite of what they did last year. It seems like every close game, the Wild found ways last year to lose or to just not have enough to get it done. This year, the 19 wins in the first 28 games is a testament to the fact that this team finds a way. No matter what the conditions, no matter what the circumstances, they just continue to find ways to win these games. And they will get opportunities. They're starting to dwindle, but they will get additional opportunities to try to pick up wins against those teams that they are neck and neck with in the standings or that are above them in the standings. But at this point, the fact that they continue to win these games with areas that can be improved, you can't ask for much more from this Minnesota Wild team. So it was another game. It was another good game last night for the Wild. Just kind of went a little pear-shaped in the third period. But they didn't panic, even when they gave up a couple of goals to lose the lead. Didn't panic, just went to work and went about their business. We have a few things to discuss from last night's game, including a subtle tweak that paid off big time by John Hynes. We'll also talk about the penalty kill. Because if there's one thing that could sink this season, I think it's that. So we'll unfold all of this. We'll continue to break things down as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Prize Picks. If you love sports, you're going to love Prize Picks, the best place to turn your sports knowledge into real money. Whether it's hockey, football, or any of your favorite sports, Prize Picks makes it easy to get in on the action. Here's why you need to get started today. You can win up to 200 times your money on Prize Picks. Get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. No need to win. The $50 is guaranteed. Prize Picks also offers fun weekly promotions like Taco Tuesday. Who doesn't love Taco Tuesday, by the way? Where select player projections are discounted up to 25%. This week on Prize Picks, I am eyeing the hockey board, looking at Jack Hughes for more than 4 shots on goal and Artemi Panarin for more than 1 assist. It's so simple to make my picks and have fun with friends while potentially cashing out fast. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's $50 instantly on Prize Picks. Run your game. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. And a reminder for you tonight, Denny is set and ready to rock for tonight's live show. 8 p.m., Denny will be going through his trade targets for the Minnesota Wild, taking every team that is out of the running and coming up with potential names for the Minnesota Wild to take a look at the trade deadline. So you're not going to want to miss that. In addition, we've got some user questions that we will be answering for you as well. 8 p.m. Don't miss it. It's going to be an unbelievable show tonight. And let's be honest, it always is with Denny. So make sure to tune in tonight at 8 p.m. So the Minnesota Wild made a subtle tweak. I should say John Hynes did last night. Subtle tweak to the lineup that paid big dividends for the Minnesota Wild. Matt Boldy had a bit of a rough one. Now, he did end up atoning for it, but a couple of penalties, and despite the 6 shots on goal, just wasn't able to generate a ton of quality looks. Boldy, after the game himself, said that he just didn't really have his best stuff. So what does John Hynes do? Well, he flops Marcus Johansson with Matt Boldy, and it leads to 2 goals for the combination of Kaprizov, Rossi, and Johansson. And Johansson ends up with a 3-point night, and that combination didn't really get going until the second period. It ends up that Johansson assists on Kaprizov's goal to give the Wild a 2-1 lead. He then scores himself, and then Marco Rossi on the game-winning goal, or the game-tying goal, in regulation. Johansson assists on that as well. And I know we have seen plenty of inconsistency with Marcus Johansson's game, but it was interesting that one of the things that was talked about heading into last night's matchup was the fact that this Utah team provides some big speed, and the Wild were going to try to stay out of a track meet with the Utah Hockey Club. But it turns out that they did need to put a little bit of speed together to be able to counter what the Utah Hockey Club was bringing to the table. And this goes back to, I think, one of the big things that has separated John Hynes from his predecessor, Dean Evason, is the willingness by John Hynes to just go with his gut and to go with how he thinks particular parts of the game are unfolding. If Dean would have been coaching last night's game, and this isn't a dig on Dean Evason, if Dean was coaching last night's game, it's probably a loss. Just because Dean was very set in his set lines. We didn't see a ton of adjustments throughout the course of the game from him. So if you go into the game and your top combination of Kaprizov, Rossi, Brodin gets shut down, tip your cap and go on to the next game. But Hynes noted in the post game that he just didn't think that the fit for Kaprizov, Rossi, Brodin was working in last night's game. And that's a key distinction too, because it doesn't mean that he doesn't think that that combination is viable going forward, because obviously it is. But that combination, even that combination, is going to have nights where it's just not doing what you are hoping it would be able to do. So Hynes identified Marcus Johansson as being somebody who could step up and, slot in for a couple of shifts just to see if it's a different look that can provide some different results. And they scored 2 goals. And it's funny because you look at the statistics in last night's game, the expected goals for Brodin, Rossi, Kaprizov was .427. Expected goals against was .08. So even though they didn't score in last night's game, they had a 7-1 shots on goal advantage. They had an expected goals of 82.9%. They had a Corsi percentage of 73.7%. These are all dominating possession numbers. And when Hynes went to Kaprizov, Rossi, Johansson, in 6 minutes and 13 seconds together, they had an expected goals for of .67. So 1.5 times what Brodin, Rossi, Kaprizov was able to do. The expected goals against was actually lower at .018. And they did score the 2 goals. They outshot Utah in terms of actual shots on goal 3-0. The expected goals percentage was 97.4%. The Corsi percentage was 72.7%. So, look, we've said it all season, and I will continue to say it because he continues to just seemingly push all the right buttons. Challenge the goal by Utah that would have made it 2-0. Ended up that it was offsides, so it got waved off the board. And the Wild end up scoring 2 straight to take the lead. Just looking for a different look in last night's game, and he goes with Johansson, Rossi, Kaprizov, and it leads to 2 goals. So credit to John Hynes for continuing to go by game vibes for what he does throughout the course of the night. We've seen him change lines around plenty and, double shift Kirill Kaprizov or try to sneak somebody in lower in the lineup. He talked about Sergachev in particular, or discussed Mikhail Sergachev. Was he shadowing Kirill or Matt Boldy during the course of the night? Because the Wild were on the road, and so Utah had the last change, so they could dictate the matchups. But this is why I think we don't have any. We don't have anything to go off of here except John Hynes never having won a postseason series in his career yet. If there's anybody that's going to be able to snap the postseason series futility, and I'm not saying that he will, I'm saying if there is anyone that is going to, John Hynes is, I think, very well equipped to do it because he is not married to one particular scheme or structure or line combinations. He is very much willing to just see how things are going throughout the course of the game and throw players that are playing well together, which is smart. It's a smart way to coach. Your line combinations, for the most part, they're going. You want to try to get line combinations set so you can build up that chemistry. But the combinations are not going to work the way that you want them to every single game. There are so many variables from the team that you're playing to the way that team in particular schemes against you to a particular player maybe just not having it one night. and being able to throw little change-up wrinkles in has made a big difference for the Wild this year. It has won them games. It's led to them being able to find combinations that can get it done, and it makes you harder to scheme against because whoever you would play in the first round of the playoffs, they may say, well, we got to do this against Kirill Kaprizov, and John Hynes can come back and say, well, we've got this, this, and this that we can do to combat that. It's about having options. It's about being flexible. It's about finding ways to neutralize advantages that your opponent suspects that they will have. So that was another good opportunity for John Hynes to just flex a little bit and just say, well, we're going to do this because Utah's been playing well, and we want to try to stay out of particular traps. So well done again by John Hynes. And look, if they can get a couple of those key pieces back healthy, that long run against those top Central Division teams, it's going to be snapped at some point. You just got to keep going to war every night. And at some point, they're going to pick up a win against one of those teams. We'll finish by talking about Marat Huznadinov finally getting on the goal sheet and why the Minnesota Wild need to probably go back to the drawing board on the penalty kill. We'll talk about all that as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. And once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day of the week. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube if you have not already, so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. And make sure to join us tonight at 8 p.m. Denny has a great show lined up for you tonight, going through a few trade targets. So it's going to be a fun conversation, looking at some potential names for the Minnesota Wild to take a look at as we get closer to the trade deadline. So do not miss out on that tonight at 8. We've also got some questions from earlier in the week that we will have Denny answer as well. Best show of the week, so make sure you don't miss it. 8 p.m. tonight, right here on YouTube. So Marat Huznadinov gets on the goal sheet for the first time in a while. And for a player in Huznadinov who we just have, I think, been hoping to see a little bit more from, some of the statistical numbers have been, well, not great. He has been, statistically one of the worst forwards in the NHL this season, just from a points perspective and some of the other metrics. But here's the key thing. Marat Huznadinov, much like the rest of the team, has been resilient and has continued to go to battle every night and just trying to do what he can to be part of the formula for this Minnesota Wild team. And I think that is something that I think that's one thing. If I had to hang my hat on one key area that John Hynes has improved this team the most this year, it's been the mindset. It's been the mindset that this team puts on the ice out there every night. With Joel Eriksson Ek and Matt Zuccarello and Jonas Brodin out of the lineup, there are more than a few nights where the teams that they're going up against have more talent on the ice. But this is a Wild team that battles every night. They work hard. They battle every game. And that's one of the reasons that they have tied for the most points in the NHL at this point in the season, which is something that they hadn't done since the 2010s. So it's something that just does not happen a lot. But it is something that I think we sorely missed last year. Was you may not score a ton of goals, you may not have your best stuff on a nightly basis, but this Minnesota Wild team has worked their tails off for a large majority of the season. There have been some games where things don't go their way, but I can count on one hand the number of games that truly got away from them this season. Whereas last year, there were so many nights where the game was over in the first period because you just didn't have the belief that they could make a comeback from any level of deficit, from one goal, let alone 2 or 3. But this year, the team believes that they're capable. They believe that all it takes is somebody stepping up and making a play. And against Utah last night, vibes were they were starting to get a little dicey. You throttle the Utah Hockey Club in the shots department in period 1, and you end up down 1-0. Utah had the goal waved off, but at that point it looked like 2-0, and you're like, okay, this is dire. This is not going the way we had hoped. And this is going to be one of the keys for this team the rest of the season. Is Kirill Kaprizov and Matt Boldy are going to be expected to do a bulk of the scoring. But who else is going to step up and take some pressure off of those guys? Yes, Kirill did score 18 goals in 28 games this season, although he has played 27 of them. So 18 out of 27, not bad at all. But who's going to step up and provide some secondary scoring for this team to take pressure off so that you can't just load up defensively on Kaprizov? And last night it was Marat Huznadinov getting it going on a breakaway. Marcus Johansson stepping into an elevated role, understanding the assignment, and scoring as part of a 3-point night. And Marco Rossi finishing the scoring up with the goal with a minute left in regulation. So you get 3 goals from secondary scorers. And the thing too, like I know Matt Boldy's in a goal rut, but this is something that we have been asking for from him this season. And I think by and large, he has provided a large portion of it. How do you impact the game when the goals aren't going in? And what did Matt Boldy do last night? He stepped up in the shootout with an opportunity to win the game on the line, and he delivered. So you're not going to have your best stuff. It's not always going to be easy. But can you still provide winning plays to help your team come away with 2 points as opposed to 1, or if not for Marco Rossi, could have ended up with 0 points last night. But that's the mark of a team. That's what we have been hoping to see from the Minnesota Wild heading into this season, and that is what they have provided time and time again, is just somebody steps up and makes a play, no matter the circumstances. And it was just another good example of that for the Minnesota Wild last night. And in the postgame, we did also get some good news on the injury front. John Hynes was asked after the game if there were any injury updates on particular key players. And he was delighted to report that Jonas, Brodin, and Matt Zuccarello have begun skating. Now, still probably a ways away from being able to return, but the fact that they're on the ice and are starting to just get some skating in is an encouraging sign. And hopefully that gives the team a little bit of a lift, that they have been able to, at the minimum, tread water with such key pieces out of the lineup. On the Joel Eriksson front, he has not as of yet, but the fact that Brodin and Zuccarello have gives you hope that they will be able to return, hopefully at some point here relatively soon. But John Hynes was quick to point out as well, with the injuries, we know we've got good players out of the lineup. It's just who's going to step up. On the Jonas Brodin front, it's been Declan Chisholm. He has looked really good since Brodin went down, stepping into an elevated role with Jared Spurgeon. And without his performance, that defense would have taken a major hit. And they've at least been able to, they've been able to keep that 5-on-5 defense pretty stingy. 2 5-on-5 goals given up last night. We got to talk about that penalty kill. It's funny because in listening to the post game, and I wanted to get this episode out, otherwise I would have just included the audio of what John Hynes said. He did not seem worried about the penalty kill when he was asked about it last night. So I don't know if that's a good sign or if I don't know how to take that. It is something that's going to have to be addressed because that's the one area that I see that could really tank this season, is a penalty kill that just can't stop opponents. You were going up against a Utah hockey team that was 3 for 31 at home on the power play, and you let them go 2 for 3. So I know there are players out of the lineup right now that are pretty key portions of that penalty kill, but I would take, if it comes down to it, if it's still in bad shape in February, I would take the Four Nations face-off break and completely start from scratch. You may even have to do it before that, but Hynes continues to say it comes down to little details that have led to goals being scored as opposed to the puck being cleared or being pushed the other way potentially. And that's great to continue to point to, but at some point, like, fix the glitch, like in Office Space, like continue to pay. And of course, I bring up the Office Space as an example, and I can't remember. I think it's Milton. They continue to pay him like there was a glitch in the payroll. They continue to pay the guy, and the new bosses come in and they're like, we fixed the glitch. Like we took care of it. At some point, you just got to figure out how. You've got the best goalie in the NHL. You have the best 5-on-5 defense or one of the best 5-on-5 defenses in the NHL. It's just not translating. And face-off wins, puck battles, like they're all little details that go into that. At some point, you just got to make a play, and you just have to do what you got to do to get the puck out of the zone. So that continues to be about the only real gripe that I have with how this season has gone so far, is that the penalty kill just continues to be a big issue. And so we will see what John Hynes can cook up to try to get that put back together. That's about the only thing that I can really point to as a detrimental issue right now for this Minnesota Wild team. So we will have another episode coming out for you here later this afternoon. We're going to take a look at the David Jiricek situation. We've got some audio from Locked On NHL Prospects breaking down Jiricek's game, and we'll talk about the decision to send him back to Iowa. What's going on there? We'll talk about all that for today's second episode of Locked On Wild. And then, as mentioned, make sure to join us tonight. Denny's got a great live show lined up for you, 8 p.m. tonight on YouTube. Make sure to join us as Denny goes through his trade targets for the Minnesota Wild. Plenty of names to consider. You do not want to miss tonight's live show. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube if you have not already, so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We've got new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.